Assalamu alaikum. So what I will do is let's start. So hello guys. Okay. Clicker test. Awesome. Circle को थोड़ा सा shift करो. नहीं clicker accessibility करनी थोड़ी सी. Awesome. चलें जी, let's start. So org design for design orgs. The topic is sort of relevant, but at the same time, what I really want to do is talk about a lot of the things in a manner where it doesn't feel too much structured. So this will sort of be structured, but at the same time, I'll go off tangents. So bear with me. Obviously, I see a lot of mentors, students. It's a very strange mix. थोड़ा सा लग रहा है सर आमिर के साथ बैठक पे भी बैठे हैं दोस्तों के साथ but at the same time डिजाइनर्स पे भी बैठे हैं लम्स पे भी बैठे हैं so it's a mix so no pressure definitely and I think it's also a first for a lot of people who I really look up to who are watching me present so yeah anyways a lot of it is obviously stolen off the internet so this is a mandatory disclaimer I'll quickly, given that I think iske baad lunch hoga, so I'll try to take the least amount of time possible, so it will be quick. It's been a very strange journey of discovery, and you'll sort of see why. Sciences and at math, O levels, commerce, अचानक से switch मार दिया because भाई ने बोला था. Law भी किया because ACCA का track था. So a lot of motivation was external. I think Abdullah was talking about career counseling, so it changed every 6 months. Got into Zabist, ad strategy, BS media sciences, ad majors. There were a couple of courses for design. The good thing was they talked about a lot of different subjects. The bad thing was they talked about a lot of different subjects. So it was basically a platter and you had to just pick and choose whatever worked for you, and then it really benefited in retrospect for me. Major shout out to two people on the panel who've been my teachers. So from typography, building foundations, teaching me animation, teaching me what to think of design beyond just pixels. I really owe it to these guys and a lot of others. Then obviously typical path for ad grads is ad agencies. Started with that, didn't like it, was freelancing on the sides, really built the craft at that side, I think. And then really was interested in tech because I wasn't a techie, nor am I a techie right now. I did want to explore it further. So I did pursue Coursera, which was very hot at the time to pursue this specialization, which really helped me understand the gaps of what I do not know, what else is out there in design. Fast forward, just a quick recap of workplaces. So Venture I joined in 2015, just at the end of it, got introduced to this client called Kareem, which was a thriving startup at the time, had failed operationally in Pakistan, starting with Karachi at the time, and they were like restarting operations in Lahore. I shifted to Lahore, by the way, for this. And spent 10 months, after which Kareem acquired us, and I shifted back to Karachi because headquarters yahan ban rahe the. And over the next sort of four and a half years, I started obviously understanding about product design, what good culture looks like, something which is very close to me. What do good design orgs look like? What does evolution look like? Izzat dena hota hai, izzat milti hai. How do you do business, but at the same time you are respectful? And that is something which was at the time not a common union which you would see at workplaces. Fast forward, in 2020, I took this decision to join Bazaar in relatively very early days. And the core motivation was where this sort of topic gets relatable, which was to build a design org. And the whole premise was that in Kareem, the premise was that I wanted to build a design team here. I had spent enough time, but due to some constraints, we couldn't expand. And because the Dubai team had already 24, 25 people, the preference was to just expand there versus expanding or investing here. So switched to build a design team and joined Bazaar. Spent around 3 years and then sort of exited to try other things, which you'll also see. Anyways, on the sides, there's obviously UXDP happening. Super happy to see some of you here who I've really met from there. And of course, there are a lot of students, and I've been teaching at Indus since for the past 3 years, primarily product management. And that's where a lot of this thesis comes from, that designers need to understand things which are not just for business folk, it is also for designers. Anyways, lamba ho gaya. Org design. So the title is obviously copied or influenced by this book. This was the book which really made a difference to me back in 2020. If anyone of you is really in pursuit of building an organization or just really learning how structures work, this is one book which really works. However, the talk is not just about this, and it's not like a book review of sorts. It's a culmination of a lot of resources which I've just sort of read and learned from and borrowed a lot of snippets over time. Making of a Manager really helped me understood what not to do as a manager, what are some common pitfalls. There were a lot of abstracted articles and research from different teams from Apple, Samsung, IBM, Philips, primarily where design teams are not reporting to design leaders. So it was very important to also see that how do you navigate this change, that you might never have a design leader eventually. And so you have to work your way around the organization for that. And finally, Build to Last, which is a pure gem or a gold mine of research, which talks about what it takes for good organizations to thrive. Anyways, so it's a lot about reflecting on team and org transitions. So what I've done is, obviously, given the experience, what you saw, a lot of it is product and tech related, and a lot of it is business and product design related. But what I've tried to make sure is that it's equally applicable for a lot of non-design orgs which are this product. Anyways, so if you just think about the organization, a typical Gantt chart, a typical sort of org chart comes to your mind, or some sort of a pyramid structure where you would probably think that, hey, there is someone at the top, there is people at the bottom, and something is happening. That's the structure. And if you look at the textbook sort of definitions, it's basically a structured group of people with a purpose. And I think what's important is it's about people and it's about a purpose, and everything sort of else follows through. So why does one design an org? Why can an org not exist without any sort of thought into it? So the whole idea is that you zoom out, you get to look at the bigger picture, you sort of put a lot of focus and intention into the why of the structure and the why of the people. So in terms of design, and this is something which you might already be familiar with, so I'll just skim through. They were typically, the traditional model, which was known as the waterfall, would have a very linear dependency on design. What you would see is that there would be a brief, there would be some design requirements, and then you would basically work your way to the final product and it will be launched. The problem with that with time was that with digital products, the iteration or the lead time to execution was almost exponentially faster. So the involvement of design in terms of the stages of the design process rapidly increased as well. And that obviously required the design as a function in terms of their expectations to be much more collaborative and much more included by default because of the nature of the work. So I've tried to redo and optimize a slide from one of the visuals. So if you look at what I was mentioning before, what the design effort looks like for us, for a lot of non-designers, would always be at the operational side, which would be UI, that would be the visual design, that would be screen achhi bana do, logo bada kar do, and all of the sorts of comments which you get in between. But if you think about it, and if you think about the structural decision making happening, there are primarily four things. So surface and structure, we sort of are talking about. So we're talking about the UI, UX, brand strategy, the brand guidelines, etc. Then you have the strategy piece into it, which is about where design is not just talking about design. Design is now collaborating with business. So you're no longer talking about screens. You're talking about features and how those features will impact the business in some shape or form. So we were seeing Gulrez talk about banking apps. So how will this feature eventually help us hit the needle or push the needle? And a lot of that strategic decision making is what does require design to be part of, and that is one of the major things which should be an expectation from the design organization. And finally, the big picture, and obviously, as a community or as an ecosystem, we're just scratching the surface at this part, where design is thought of a thought partner when it comes to business decisions or long-term strategy decisions for businesses. Anyways, I've tried to oversimplify this transition into three things. So you have scale. What essentially scales mean is that you might get more people, or your scope might also increase as well. Over time, what you would see is that log bhi badhenge, and at the same time, what you would see is your domain would also increase in terms of the scope of work. You might not just be looking at one team, and so on and so forth. For skill set, again, think of it as a cross-functional unit. So you might just be looking at UI, but then you might look into flows. Then you might get people for research, and copy, and front-end dev, so on and so forth. And finally, on the influence part, initially you just influence your immediate stakeholder, which is your PM or project manager or whoever. But over time, what the expectation is that you're able to influence leadership, you're able to influence the key core stakeholders who are eventually executives of the org. Anyways, so just to sort of keep it very, very crisp, I've just broken down into 4 of these stages. You'd have a design team of 1, which is a good majority of us in this room and as an ecosystem. The next hit one is building a case for the +1. So these are the small teams. These are the ones who are really, really getting consistent no's from their managers that, hey, we have budget constraints, we really cannot hire. Finally, the bottom 2, you then talk about orgs and how teams expand. The last one, however, multiple orgs, and these are the examples which we usually find externally. Uber, 4,500 designers, and Airbnb, 650. I mean, the numbers are insane. But what I want you guys to realize is that there are eventually multiple organizations. So the total number is a cumulative of multiple teams. So in structure, in principle, the structures, for the sake of understanding, remain the same. Anyways, so quickly doing this, when you're alone, you want to do it all. And your expectation is that you really are treated the way you think you should be treated. And you really, really want to do everything you can to deliver. So the name of the game is just to get shit done. You have to deliver and you have to execute. That is the fastest way to get serious when it comes to organization where you're alone. You dominate that space where you're really working and you are known to work your whatever you're working on, you would get that attention. And that is like tried and tested. Even within the room, we have a lot of examples for this right in front of us. So as part of the theme, what you have to realize is that you obviously start with craft. A lot of it gets easy when people trust your craft. So you have a lot of leverage which you can take away. आप design उनके अच्छे बना के नहीं दोगे तो they will not take you seriously. Design अच्छे बना दो and then give 15 other suggestions, they would happily understand and take that feedback. I think I'll let you guys read the rest, but the important one is showcasing interest in business. And those who know me know how much I talk about this, that you really have to let the other person know by action that you are really caring about what they also are want to do, and eventually what the business wants to get out of the design team. And finally, you consistently get feedback. And I think This is something which separates good from great, in my opinion. The lead time and the quality of how quickly you adapt and gather feedback, that really makes the difference. This feedback, by the way, is on yourself. So how quickly can you learn from whatever you're not doing right? So for a quick recap on Marty Kagan, he's the president of the Silicon Valley Product Group. He's the thought leader when it comes to product strategy. He talks about the four risks. A lot of you might have seen the viability, feasibility, desirability. He's one of the people who has coined that. What he has obviously updated it by splitting desirability and usability into two. So what used to happen was designers have always been mixed with desirability, but what ended up not happening was the value part. So the user can use it, but will they pay for it? That was a missing link in that argument, and that is something which they've tried to solve, and they're now sort of trying to make sure that this is something which is equally talked about. It might be a great experience, but if the user is not willing to pay for it, it really doesn't matter, and it will remain in your prototypes forever. Eventually, like I was saying, getting feedback is key. So in this stage, the biggest piece of advice which I would give is just to keep on getting feedback on how can you better help your immediate stakeholder. So hard work, feedback, and just delivering whatever you're doing. Milestone, if everything goes right, you have the case. So now talking about how to get that +1. Now this is the point where you've maxed out. Now you have to basically grow exponentially in terms of what else can you do, in terms of now also starting to see if it makes sense to delegate things, which you are now a master of. Again, memes are needed to break things. So we really do call for support, but we actually get this type of support. Yeah, we believe in design. Anyways, so the mindset here is just to understand that design is just one team, and people really don't settle well to this thought, especially in our circles, especially in design circles in art schools. It's a very difficult thought to consume at first. And the whole idea is that we think we're special, but everyone thinks they're special, and then we have to just accept the fact that design is one of the many teams. And we have to focus on alliances. And that is how you get into that door, and this is something which I saw from the leaders, at least in Kareem. The beauty or the synergy of the product counterpart and the design counterpart, if you can join forces, everything else is secondary. You would get customer feedback done, you would get that additional feature done, वो जो शशका आपको animation डालनी थी वो भी prioritize हो जाएगी. A lot of these things actually get a lot easier, and there is less friction if you can just figure out the relationship between whoever you're working with. A lot of it, again, is about really not taking it as a personal feedback and just thinking of it, how can you help that other person better? Two things which I really recommend in this case is just letting them into your process and getting into their process as well. Almost think of it, if you look at the right one, think of that you're almost this wildlife which they can come and stalk at every time. So for those people who use Figma and they have cursors hovering, that is okay. That is actually a good sign that someone is interested enough that they are opening Figma or any, whatever design tool of your choice. So speak their language, but more importantly, figure out what works for them and how can you join forces and connect the dots. Finally, on this part, you're now hopefully assuming that you now have people, you have decent coverage. Now it's basically trying to identify what is the structure. So there are important concepts which really, really help in this. And this, a lot of it is relevant regardless of the scale or the transition. So for one important aspect is this idea of cross-functional teams. So this can mean that I might be a buyer team and a seller team, and I can now service both. Or it can also mean that I have a researcher, I have a UI designer, I have a front-end developer, and they're also working in the same design team. So it's very important to really understand which part of the business requires which part of the skills, right? Another important recommendation, which I would say, is the Spotify squad model. So it's a mini video of sorts. And what I would recommend to see from it is that why was this brought into in the first place, right? There might be a lot of things happening, but the whole idea of the squad model was that there were a lot of silos. Every function was just caring about their self, and eventually whoever was closer to the money would get priority. That is something which even today we resonate with as a problem statement as individuals, where we might not get budgets, etc., etc. But basically, this focuses on autonomous teams, complete teams when it comes to function. You don't have to depend on others, and then you as a whole are responsible for the quality as well as delivery. Now, towards the last areas, leadership traits, and these are like, again, this doesn't have to wait till you're like 10 people or 5 people. This can happen starting right now. And I think this is like every group project. Zab is for me, but I'm not sure for you guys. But I could relate to this one. Anyways, so it's primarily not about yourself anymore, and you have to accept that fact when you're in a team. A lot of what you're doing, leadership speaks when you're not just looking out for yourself. Like, this doesn't mean you do not look out for yourself. I 100% recommend you be selfish about it. But at the same time, you're also open to what other people around you are going through and empathize with them. And as much as we talk about empathy and understanding your users, I don't think we do a fair job in understanding about our teams that much, and that is what we need to do. And I think what's important is that between design teams, you might be great, but it's very important to rally non-design teams as well. So it's about the business folk, it's about customer support, it's about the engineering team, the product team, and how can you work and experiment together to deliver goals. One of the biggest pieces of advice, or this has helped me, no pressure, is Radical Candor. It's an amazing book, but this image synthesizes the context. The whole idea is that we culturally do not give hard facts that easily. हमें किसी को बुरा कहना, we really shy away from it. And this is one thing which makes the difference in a lot of the cases. You really have to have these conversations which are empathetic, but at the same time, you have to be critical or honest about it. And it has to be candid so that you can eventually grow from both sides. You obviously have to talk about the money. This is something which people fly away from. Everyone wants a designer, but the moment they would be asked for how much business would this designer eventually get you, or where will they be positioned at, people really do not have an answer for, and that is the problem. So you have to figure out a way where design is not a cost center. You have to figure out what business objectives is each of the designers delivering, and how do we eventually get to a point where we can self-sustain ourselves. Right now, we're always in the Figma file, but the problems are happening everywhere else. And that is the whole ivory tower concept. Anyways, quickly rushing through. So understanding budgets, understanding the return on investment, understanding people health and design maturity. All of these 4 are different dimensions. And what you need to understand is each of these things apply at the people level, apply at the team level, and you really have to understand these to figure out how to proceed. Anyways, coming back to this one. So for each of the states, you would have different people, different expectations from them. And then synthesizing this with scale. So initially you have bandwidth allocation conversations, you have skill set, and then coverage. You will start getting multiple functions. This is now eventually over time you get different functions and then different expectations from it. And finally, within influence, you would get visibility of the bigger picture as you get senior. The expectation is that if you're senior, if you're not getting these information, this should be a sign. And this is for a lot of people who's been, yes. So this is for a lot of people who have really spent a lot of time in singular organizations. If you're really not getting these categorical changes, it should be a time to reflect. And that is very important because we have to figure out systems so that we scale this. Ending at this, it's not an easy ride. It takes patience, but at the same time, the last piece of advice is to seek order in chaos. And that is something which I've understood is an essential, because nothing sort of will come easy, but if you have the right focus and hopefully some luck, we'll be able to get something done. Thank you.